What's up, folks? I don't usually go live, but I was reading a story tonight and I found it fascinating. So, as typical, I'm debating some stuff on Facebook, and some things were brought up about Black history and wealth in America back in the 1800s, 1900s, and the wealth gap and things like that. So, I started going back, doing some research so I can be a little more informed, just to gather some more information. So I run across the story of this guy, Lunsford Lane. He was born what I'm reading from here is the biography of Lunsford Lane, 30th of May, 1803 to 1863. They don't know his exact date of death. It's written by Alice R. Cotton. There's several works about Lunsford Lane, though, and I just found it interesting. Like, it really feels like this guy should have a movie made about him, because it literally goes through the gambit of being a slave to being free to experiencing extreme hate and physical harm to being free to being a businessman. Like, this dude was like living the dream, and then things come crashing down. So I started to write a post about it, and I said it's not going to do it justice. Like, I need to do a video. So this is basically the story of Lunsford Lane. I'm not going to read it word for word. I'm going to kind of commentate over it. So Lunsford Lane, as I said, was born May 30th, 1803. He was born into slavery, and he was a slave of Sherwood Haywood. Sherwood Haywood, was an older gentleman, and later on, Lunsford ended up being the slave of his wife, because after he died, the wife assumed him and she had to make some money. So she had to use him use him to make some money. So, all right, this is what happened. So he was a house slave, which gave him certain benefits, What he would do is he would go, well, let me back up. Actually, he had a basket of peaches from his dad, and he sold the basket of peaches. And when he sold them, it was like, wait a minute, profit. So he was able to profit from that basket of peaches from his father, and that started him into these business venture ideas. So what he did was he started trying to earn money for freedom, because at the time he wanted his freedom, obviously. And so he saved whatever he could from that. He also got tips from people who were guests of the Haywood family. He cut wood during his spare time and at night. And then he and his father, now mind you, he's still a slave. He and his father started making and selling tobacco pipes. They were special smoking tobacco pipes. And he also often sold them to state legislators. Like, let that rattle around in your brain. This is North Carolina. Chapel Hill, North Carolina, is where this is coming out of. This is a local paper that is writing about the history of North Carolina. And they're saying that the legislators who were not giving this man his freedom were actually buying tobacco pipes from a slave. Like, that's crazy. Like, he's not good enough to be free, but they will buy your pipes. Anyway, all right, so what he would do is he would make these runs to buy supplies for the house. So he was buying food and things like that for the Haywood family, just normal stuff, shopping runs. And he realized that he could buy things in bulk when the prices were lower, and he'd save a lot of money. So he took it from, all right, I'm going to buy things in bulk for the family, to, wait a minute, I got a few dollars, I'm going to buy a few things. So what he would do was buy stuff for the family, and then he'd buy stuff for himself as well. But that business mind was there. He was a straight up entrepreneur, because what he would do was, let's say, buy, whatever, apples, whatever, or something that didn't expire. And he would take those things and wait till the price rose. When the price would go up, he would resell it and make a profit. Now, this is a slave dude. Like, this dude was a slave, and he was a straight up entrepreneur. He's fascinating. So that was just more of his, entrepreneurial spirit coming about. So all these little things he was trying to do to make money and to become a free man. So he ended up getting married. The lady was a slave to another family, the Boylan family, and she was ended up being bought by this guy Benjamin B. Smith. He was a merchant in Raleigh, and so this is around the time that Sherwood Haywood died in 1829. This is his wife then started having to utilize the slaves to make money to pay off some debts and things like that. At the time, Lunsford expanded his tobacco business. He called it Edward Lunsford and Lane, and he had agents in Fayetteville, Salisbury, and Chapel Hill. Think about that. Lunsford Lane. He was a slave who had a tobacco business, and he had agents in Fayetteville, Salisbury, and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This is 1828. 1828. This dude was doing business as a slave. These are some things that, the narrative doesn't teach us. We don't hear about these sort of stories. So Mrs. Haywood decided that he could buy his freedom for $1,000. Now, let's put that into perspective. $1,000 in 1835. That's $26,445.91 today. So let that sink in. The dude made enough money to buy his freedom for $26,445.91 in today's currency. Mr. Dale, it's Sherwood Haywood was a slave owner, and Lunsford Lane is was the slave. So he bought his freedom, and when he bought it, North Carolina legislator, mind you, he was selling tobacco products to these dudes. They wouldn't authorize his manumission, which manumission is the same as emancipation, except it happens from a slave owner. So emancipation is from a government, manumission is from the slave owner. So they wouldn't allow it because he couldn't prove meritorious service, which means he couldn't prove that he was deserving of a reward or praise. So, weird law that they put into place to block it. So what he did was he went to his wife's owner, Mr. Smith, Benjamin B. Smith, and had him buy him and took him to New York. When he went to New York, he received his manumission papers. So now he's free. So he's a free man in New York, but all his people, his family's back in North Carolina. So, of course, what does he do? He tries to go back to North Carolina to buy his wife and children and get them out. And what he ended up doing was buying them for $2,500. In today's money, that's $66,114.78. Let that register. This dude was free in 1835, and he went back to buy his family for $66,000. He had just bought himself for $26,000. Think about that kind of money at that time for a slave. Let that register. This dude is becoming my hero, and the more I read about him. So anyway, he did it in installments, but they allowed them to live in a house that they built there in Raleigh. So he didn't go back to New York. He stayed in Raleigh. So he had the tobacco and the firewood business because he was still cutting wood. And he worked as a messenger and a handyman for the governor. So this is where trouble comes in. So he was a slave, then he becomes free, and then he starts amassing a little bit of wealth. So 5 years later, in 1840, he was notified that because he was emancipated in New York, that it was in violation of state law, and that free blacks from other states weren't allowed to enter North Carolina. Like, there was a law that if you were free somewhere else, you could not come to the state. The whole state was banned to free blacks. That's a little mind-boggling, but that was the law at the time. So they gave him 20 days to leave. So he received a bunch of support from a bunch of influential whites. And this is another part of the narrative that isn't told too often, is that not all white people were evil or, angry with black people. Some of them did try to help, and in this case, these influential whites tried to bid for him to stay in North Carolina. But in 1841, he was forced to go. And so they had given him 20 days. This was in September, so he made it to May of 1841, and they made him leave. And so he was taking one of his children. He took one of his children and went to New York, and also to Boston. And he raised money by lecturing in churches and abolitionist meetings. So after this, of course, in his typical fashion, a year later, almost a year later, April of 1842, he returned to Raleigh to try to get the rest of his family. He had talked to the governor before he went there, and the governor was like, I can't, the law is the law. I can't really do anything about it, but I'm, pretty sure you'll be okay. Like, go ahead and come anyway. And so he makes his way back to Raleigh, and he gets arrested. They charged him with delivering abolitionist letters and tried him at Call Court. Now, there was no proof about it, so the mayor let it go, and they released him. When they released him, a mob abducted him. They dragged him to the gallows, and they tarred and feathered him. It wasn't only from the help of his white friends that smuggled him out overnight, and his wife, children, and his mother. This was one of the, Mrs. Haywood, the original slave owner of his, helped him and his family catch a train to Philadelphia. 2 years later, his father was freed from the Haywood family as well. They ended up living in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Worcester, Oberlin, Ohio. He continued to lecture, and again, they don't know what year he actually died, but he died around that time. So, like, summing up the story, like, that was just fascinating to me to hear that he made so much money that he was able to spend in that time money, $3,500, to free himself and his family. And then once he gets his freedom, goes back, and he ends up getting tarred and feathered. I'm sure he got beaten as well during that time. And he has a biography out. It's called Lunsford Lane. And part of his biography, he states that he thought it was a good escape. And like the mindset of that, like, okay, I just had a good escape. He had a good escape because he got tarred and feathered and he didn't get hung. Like, that was his mindset. Like, I escaped. I didn't get tarred and feathered. I didn't get hung. I was only tarred and feathered. The mental mindset of this dude during a time that is unfathomable in a state that wouldn't allow free blacks to live is something that needs to permeate in this country right now across everybody. It's not just a black thing. Facing that much adversity, being a slave, becoming an entrepreneur while in slavery, being an entrepreneur outside of slavery, making money state to state to state that he went, and amassing enough money to buy his freedom. What's your excuse? Like, literally, what excuse do you have right now not to get out there and do equal or more than what Lunsford Lane did? He's fascinating. Anyway, thought I would share it. There's plenty of information out there. There's a book by Richard Bardoff called The Negro Vanguard. There's Anti-Slavery Leaders in North Carolina by John Spencer Bassett. John Hope Franklin, The Free Negro of North Carolina. There's plenty of stuff out here where you can find out about it. There's also Lunsford Lane's own biography, which is called The Narrative of Lunsford Lane, formerly of North Carolina, or Raleigh, North Carolina. There was a second edition published in 1842. I'm going to keep reading about him because I haven't read his own personal words. I skimmed over some of his stuff. This was more of a short version of it. But you should definitely read up on this guy. Use it as an inspiration that you need in order to get out in this world, make a change, make a difference. So, Lunsford Lane, I'm out.